New Zealand Super Rugby Team of the Decade. Now, this is not chosen by me. This is the official Super Rugby Team of the Decade, as selected by the folks at, I guess, Super Rugby. Sansa, I'm not sure, but it's on the Super Rugby website. Thank you to Lance for bringing these teams to my attention. He first showed me the South African one. The Aussie one's come out, and there's a New Zealand one out as well. So I'll go over these. I'll start with the Kiwi one because it was the first one out. It seems to be basically just picked on stats. They've got their stats from Opta. People have asked me to do teams of the decade and teams of all time and whatnot. It's tough, especially with teams of the decade, because you've just got to happen to be playing a lot within those 10 years. I would have thought, like, there's some guys who might play from, 2005 to 2015, 10 years, but 5 years in each decade, whereas other guys might go just so happen to make their debut around 2010 and then just happen to leave Super Rugby in 2020. Those guys are more likely to make your team of the decade because they have had more chance to impress. So it's kind of a funky one. From the looks of how they've chosen these guys, it seems to be, it's stats driven for sure, based on Opta's stats, and largely it seems to be totals. So I mean, you can look at some guys who maybe play every week and they play 80 minutes every game, so they may have the most total number of tackles. Or you might look at some guy who's only played half the season, then got injured, but if you looked at his average tackles per game, he might have a ton more than the guy who played more games. You know what I mean? So this one seems to be totals, which is one way to do it. When I pick all my dream teams and whatnot, it tends to be a mix of totals, averages, gut feeling, a kind of combination. But I guess to keep it kind of fair, they've gone with seemingly, I'm not sure, the totals. But I will go through the names, and you guys can let me know your thoughts as well. So, starting with the props, the Super Rugby Team of the Decade. They have gone with the Crusaders, man, at loosehead. With Wyatt Crockett, bit of a legend at the Crusaders, played a record number of games for them. And then at tight head, it's a Hurricanes man. He's got a double-barreled surname, so I'm just going to go with first letter and then second barrel. Jeff Tumunga Allen. So, interesting kind of picks. And it's a funny one because anytime I do some kind of team where I pick, I get all comments of people saying why which pick is wrong, which pick is right, and sometimes that can be annoying. I don't mind the ones where going, oh, that guy is not as good as this guy that I would have picked for these reasons, rather than just that guy sucks. I'm not saying either of these guys sucks. Wyatt Crockett, they've said, played more than 7,000 minutes, more minutes than any other New Zealand prop in the decade, scored the second most tries, 9, and made the second most tackles, 729 among such players. So he played a lot of games, scored some tries, and made a bunch of tackles. I mean, I don't have a problem with Crockett there, given his kind of legendary status at Crusaders and New Zealand Rugby, won a bunch of Super Rugby titles. Wasn't always the starting guy, but again, he still managed to maintain his spot. Apart from that last season where he kind of dropped to third choice loose head, he's a pretty solid choice, man. I can't think of any other guys over the last 10 years who maybe made more of an impact than Wyatt Crockett, so that's cool. Jeff Tumunga Allen, they say, made 201 carries for 501 metres. Only one New Zealand prop has made more metres in the last 10 years of Super Rugby. So they looked at his total metres run. He also beat the second most number of defenders. He beat 41 defenders for any New Zealand prop in this period. So, yeah, that's one metric that you can look at. I would have thought, personally, looking at defenders beaten and metres gained is maybe for your outside backs or your midfielders or something like that. Not necessarily your props. I would have thought scrummaging. His scrummaging's alright. It's never been the best. I would have thought that's kind of his primary job. So if I was going to comment on these guys' YouTube video, I would have been like, yeah, man, Tumunga Allen was a mainstay for the Hurricanes for years. I might have looked at somebody like, Ben Franks. Not Ben Franks, Owen Franks. If I'm going to make my YouTube comment, I got to get the details correct. Owen Franks, maybe not as flashy in terms of his run meters as defenders beaten, but in terms of his scrummaging, pretty top notch. He's another guy who also lost his place at the end of his time with the Crusaders. At least lost his place in the All Blacks. Tumunga Allen, I mean, they're ignoring international stuff, so I kind of got to take that out of my mind. But Tumunga Allen, yeah, he was a solid Super Rugby prop. I think he got one All Blacks cap, maybe two. Kind of always on the fringe. But honestly, I would have thought there's other props out there, maybe even some of the Blues guys, like I think Tuunga Fasi has probably made a bit more of an impact. Maybe, again, not as flashy. I think his scrummaging probably improved a fair bit more. That's just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's other guys as well. But again, it's a 10-year period, and Tumunga Allen was definitely a mainstay for the Hurricanes for a large period of that 10 years. So I can accept that as a pick. Next, hooker. They have gone with Cody Taylor. Again, he's a pretty darn good pick. I would have thought last 10 years it's probably between him and Dane Coles. They've said Cody Taylor gained 1,157 meters, 338 carries, most clean breaks of any hooker over the last decade, produced most try assists, any player in this position, fifth most tackles with 542. So yes, totals all very good, man. I can't think of, who have been the other good hookers in New Zealand rugby. James Parsons has been there at the Blues. No way he would topple Cody Taylor. Like I said, I think it's probably between him and Dane Coles. So, yeah, fair call. Fair call on that one. The locks. They've gone with Whitelock and Retallick. Kind of the most obvious and, I guess, correct picks. Two of the best locks New Zealand has ever produced, just happened to play in similar times. So yeah, pretty awesome guys. I'm not going to argue with these at all. These would be, I think, pretty much everybody's picks. Whitelock won more lineouts, including steals, than any other New Zealand player in Super Rugby in the last decade. Also made 1,053 tackles. No New Zealand player in his position has made more. Of Retallick, they said only one New Zealand player in this position has played more minutes than Retallick in the last decade. Most carries, most meters gained, offloads, defenders beaten of all New Zealand players in his positions overall. So the guys are just a phenomenon. Both those guys, excellent players. So, yep, fair call. Now, the Lucies. Blindside. They have gone with Brad Shields. Number 8, they have gone with Kieran Reid. And open side, they have gone with Ardie Savea. Interesting picks. Kieran Reid, I think you'd probably say, is a pretty fair pick. Is there any other number 8 who's potentially outshone him in New Zealand? It's a hard thing to say over 10 years. I would have thought that's pretty much Kieran Reid in the last 10 years. So it says he gained the most meters, which is 3,000 plus, the most carries of any number 8 in Super Rugby in the last decade. Also, only one of 2 such players to make 800 plus tackles. So he made 841. So again, you're looking at totals, so you don't know how many average tackles was he making per game, but he played a lot of games, played a lot of minutes, made a lot of tackles. Kieran Reid, man, he will play with the year at one point, so who's going to argue? Ardie Savea. Now, he's a kind of dynamic player. I'm not sure. What year did he make his debut? I know they kind of eased him into the squad. They played him from the bench a lot. They kind of played him one game, didn't play him a second game when he was quite young, because they didn't want to burn him out when his brother was kind of at the peak of his powers. But for him, it says made the second most clean breaks, 84, defenders beaten, 219, and try assists, 22 of any forward in the last 10 years of Super Rugby. So his impact has been, very, very evident. He's, like I said, just dynamic. Like the guy could probably play 13 if you put that jersey on the back. He's quick, he busts tackles, he gets turnovers. But that's a popular jersey. You got Sam Cane there over the last 10 years, has definitely had a big impact on New Zealand rugby. And you got Richie McCaw, but he's probably only there for about half of those 10 years. So he's not really going to be able to add as much. I forgot to mention with Hooker that Dane Coles was also out with concussion for a fair bit of the last 10 years as well. But yeah, that 7 jersey is a pretty contested one, but I can see why if you're looking at numbers, Ardie Savia is always going to stand out with a phenomenal amount of numbers because he is just that kind of dynamic player. Brad Shields, I'm not sure that I would have picked Brad Shields. 722 tackles was the second most of any player to wear the 6 jersey in the last 10 years of Super Rugby, 59 turnovers and 43 offloads, 36 clean breaks. They give those numbers, but without any context as to where that sits for number 6s in Super Rugby. So, I don't know, man. As a Blues man, I think Jerome Kaino was pretty good over the last 10 years. Other teams, I'm just going to stick with Kaino as potentially my pick for the 6 jersey. But again, I don't have any stats to back it up over the last 10 years. It's just kind of my gut feeling. But so you got Crusader, Hurricane, Chief, Hurricane, Crusader, Hurricane. So if you're Highlanders and Blues fans, you've missed out thus far. And that continues as we go into the number 9. They've picked TJ Perenara. So I think that might have been Highlanders maybe potentially first optimistic pick to get a guy in there with Aaron Smith, but they've gone with TJ. And I think TJ's one is probably an easier pick if you're looking at just purely stats because he does get more tries, man. He gets tries like crazy. I would say he busts more tackles. What have they said? Scores 55 tries. Second most overall. He's also gained the most meters with 3,000 plus of any Scrum-half, and he's the only such player to make 100 plus clean breaks with 115. He does more of that than Aaron Smith. Aaron Smith, I think, is more of a crisp pass distribution guy, box kicking and whatnot. So that's kind of hard stuff to measure with pure stats. So I can see why TJ gets the pick. It was probably going to be between TJ and Aaron over the last 10 years anyway. 10. They have gone with Bowden Barrett. And that, I don't know if that's a controversial one. I mean, Dan Carter played half of the decade. Bowden Barrett won 1 Super Rugby title. They've technically listed him as a Blues player, but he hasn't played a game for the Blues yet. So essentially, he's a Hurricanes pick. There, they say of Bowden, top point scorer in Super Rugby in the last 10 years, while no fly half has scored more tries with 34 or beat more defenders with 236. Barrett also made the second most try assists, 60. So yeah, apart from Dan Carter, is there any other 10? I mean, the Blues, no, I'm not even going to go there. Maybe Aaron Cruden. Over the last 10 years, Richie Mo'unga's probably a bit... Him and Dan Carter have kind of split that Crusaders time 50-50. So maybe that's kind of a tough split, and the Highlanders have had a few guys rotating in through that jersey as well. So, yeah, that one's a bit of a tough pick. I think that's one where Bowden maybe sneaks it by the fact that it's those particular 10 years. If it's a bit earlier or if it's a bit later, maybe he doesn't get there. I don't know. Midfielders, and the Hurricane theme continues. They have gone with Nani Laumape. And again, when you look at the stats, this guy is a dream because he just does crazy, crazy stuff. 43 tries. He scores tons of tries, which is the most from any 12 in the last 10 years of Super Rugby. Beat the most defenders, 231, 590 carries, and made 51 offloads. I remember I did a video ages ago comparing him, Ryan Crotty, Sonny Bill, Martin Onu, and if you looked at certain aspects of Laumape's game, like tackle busts, tries, and I think line breaks, he was like the best of all of them by a mile. But when you looked at his distribution, he was pretty much the last guy. Crotty was first. They've got like totally different skill sets. So, should Crotty be there? It just depends. Do you want tries and tackle busts, or do you want try assists, line break assists, and better D? Yeah. I think Crusaders fans would probably argue Crotty there. But, yeah, either way. 13 jersey, they've gone with ALB. Interesting one, because he kind of floats. He floats between 13 and 12, but they've gone with ALB. They said he made the second most carries, 361, and second most meters gained with over 1,000 of any New Zealand 13. The only New Zealand player to make 50-plus clean breaks at that position. So, I mean, yeah, I guess him and Crotty both floated between 13. I don't know how long has Goodhue been at the Crusaders. Who else has played in those years? That's the thing. I mean, Nonu played in the last 10 years between, mostly 12, I guess. Conrad Smith, when did he finish? 2015. So again, he probably played about half the time. Nonu played half the time plus a year at the Blues. So maybe those guys didn't just do enough years. So the likes of ALB and Laumape can sneak in there. I mean, I'm not questioning ALB's talent, man. The guy's phenomenal as well. So yeah, that's who it is. Outside backs, left wing. They have gone with Julian Savea. Said scored the third most tries, which was 50 of any player in Super Rugby last decade. Also, only one of 3 players to get 7,000 plus meters from 1,000 carries. So averaging 7 meters a carry is pretty good. Pretty good numbers from him. Here's an interesting one because he was a beast up until, 2016? 17, he was starting to lose his place. Maybe 2017, he started to kind of drop off and wasn't looking like as devastating as he was at his peak, for sure. And probably over the last 10 years, it's a fair pick. Rico Ioane kind of came on as well, so maybe he, if I put him a Blues hat on, would be a bit of a competitor there, but they've gone with Julian Savea. So, yeah, man, they both had pretty big impacts. Even Rico, I guess, in a shorter time frame, has started to fall off the pace a little bit as well. So that's another Hurricane. Fullback, they have gone with Ben Smith. That one's probably going to be tough to argue with. I mean, maybe Israel Dag. Damien McKenzie may be worth a shout in terms of some of his numbers, but probably didn't have the same time. Like Ben Smith has just been a stalwart over those 10 years. So most carries with over 1,300, most meters 8,000 plus, almost 9,000. Defenders beaten almost 400. Only Israel Folau scored more tries from fullback. So yeah, man, Ben Smith was a rock. So I got pretty much no questions with him playing there. And they've credited this guy as being half Blues, but they've gone with Waisake Naholo. Did I spell his name wrong? Naholo. I almost put an A there. Yeah, Waisake Naholo, pretty much for his Highlanders days. They've written Highlanders Blues, but the little icon they've put is a Highlander, which is fair. That's where he did all his good work. Only one of 2 New Zealand players to score more tries than... Only two New Zealand players to score more tries than Naholo in Super Rugby last 10 years. 600 carries, 4,000 plus meters, 109 clean breaks. Did a pretty rock-solid job on that right wing. A lot of the big-time winger guys tends to be out on the left wing. So, yeah, man, Waisake... for a few years there was definitely our first choice right winger at All Blacks level and an easy walk-in for the Highlanders as well. I'm trying to think if there's been any other right wingers in that time. Someone in the comments will give me a real one to think about, but off the top of my head, it's a pretty solid choice. So I'm not going to argue with that one. So, yeah, essentially that is the New Zealand Super Rugby team of the decade. So you got 4 Crusaders, which seems a bit light, given that they've had a pretty good run in the last few years. No Crusaders backs. You've only got 2 Chiefs, which again seems a little bit light. 2 Highlanders, maybe that's fair. I mean, they've included Bowden Barrett with a Blues icon, but come on, man. It should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Hurricanes, which maybe seems a bit high. I'm not giving the Hurricanes guys grief, but I think it could probably be a little bit more balanced than that. But again, it's the way you're measuring it. It's 10-year block. There are some guys who played half of it, and other guys, I think Dan Carter-Moonga one is a good example of that. So, yeah. The Blues may be a bit hard done by. They've had some good players, even if their results have been pretty awful. They probably should get at least one guy in there, maybe. But who do you reckon they've got as the Super Rugby Player of the Decade from New Zealand? Which one of those guys? Player of the Decade. Kieran Reid? Maybe? Ben Smith? Bowden Barrett. Bowden Barrett. So they've said New Zealand Player of the Decade is Bowden Barrett. They've got him in there in his Blues jersey. Stats and facts: 34 tries, 1,238 points, 99 clean breaks, 236 defenders beaten, 105 offloads, 60 try assists. Bowden Barrett was the top point scorer in Super Rugby the last 10 years. No fly half scoring more tries. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah. One World Player of the Year a couple of times, so who are we to argue with that? But yeah, that is the New Zealand Super Rugby Team of the Decade, according to the fine folks at Super Rugby. So, yeah. I'll be doing the South African team and the Australian team at some point too. They've also done kind of brief articles on the Sunwolves and Hawares, but obviously there's not as many players to pick from, seeing as there's only the one team each. But, yeah, there you go. Bit of an interesting read. Again, a few questionable ones. It's nice for me to kind of be on the other foot. Like I said, like usually I'm the one picking the team and reading comments. Most of the comments are gold, and people usually have pretty good points, which is where I learn a lot, which is why I like to read and respond to comments. Every now and again I get people who are just like, Shields, he sucks. Not so useful. But anyway, it is nice to be on this side of the fence, being able to look at somebody else's team and think, I would have done it a bit differently. But, yeah. You guys let me know your thoughts on this team. And, yeah, I'll look at the South African one next and the Aussie one a bit after. But anyway, cheers, guys. Talk to you again soon. See you later.